Hello, everyone. My name is Siobhán Wills, and on behalf of the Transitional Justice Institute and the Northern Ireland Human Rights Festival, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. The subject is a somber one. The extreme violence, war crimes, human rights violations and acts of terror taking place since October the 7th in the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We are fortunate to have an outstanding panel of experts to speak about them. Susan Power, Head of Legal Research at Al-Haq, a long-standing independent human rights organization based in Ramallah. Francesca Albanese, UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967. And William Schabas, Professor of International Law at Middlesex University. And the event will be introduced by my colleague, Thomas Hansen, who is also a research fellow at the University of Madrid. And my thanks also to Saman Jalal and Danielle Mayushi, who will be interpreting, and also to Alan Meban, who is hosting this event. And I'll now pass to Thomas Hansen.
Thanks for the kind introductions, Professor Wills, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm grateful to have been invited to take part in today's webinar about human rights and international law in the context of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And so thanks to you, Professor Wills, for inviting me here today to speak at this timely and important event, and to the other speakers joining us here today. To the Transitional Justice Institute and Ulster University for hosting us online, and of course to our audience and participants online with us today. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and I look forward to an engaging conversation. I also want to thank the Maria Zambrano grant in Universidad Carlos III de Madrid, where I'm currently undertaking a research appointment that helps facilitate the time and environment that's needed to engage this important conversation. And to thank my colleagues here for the stimulating conversation we are having about the topics we're discussing here today. And so let's get on with business. I will use my opening remarks to try to frame the questions posed for our event today around what I see as a profound problem with the current global order and the legal architecture surrounding it. So let me start by saying, I wish I could reference international law, the call for calm. I wish I could express faith that the international system will ultimately help us deal more adequately, more responsibly with the situation we're facing. But I cannot. And I'm sad, I'm upset, I'm angry. I'm furious that we need to even have this conversation today. And so I'm disappointed to say that I have rather limited faith that the international legal order in its current functioning and institutions will help us much here. At the same time, of course, I hope we can explore today whatever opportunities there may be to promote international law, to promote basic humanitarian values, to promote peace, to promote justice in the context of the conflict we're witnessing. And so with that, let me get straight to the main point in my remarks. We got a very serious problem, a very fundamental problem, as I see it, with our current global order and the legal system embraced by it. The essence of that problem, as I see it, is that as a consequence of, or perhaps rather as an inherent, predictable, undeniable reality of our current global order, the attitude of key players in it, and what comes with it, we're witnessing an absolute disaster for humanity playing out in Gaza and the broader region. Why do I say this? I say it because that global order cannot, it fundamentally doesn't want to see its own key players restricted by international law. And that's the fundamental condition that leads us to disaster, a disaster where very basic principles, very fundamental principles concerning the use of force and hostilities and protection of people and protection of groups of people are not only sidelined, but creates a reality where these basic rules are effectively put out of play. And that is so, I believe, not just because the ones leading on that military campaign in Gaza want it to be so, but also because the ones who claim to lead in that global order are seemingly okay with that. They may even think this serves their own interests, but does it? I don't think so, because the type and scale of crimes and the total disregard for international law that we see in Gaza is rendering the current Western-led global order fundamentally illegitimate, not only in the eyes of the people who suffer as a consequence, but many other among us too. So let's take a step back here. The members or supporters of this global order, they call it the rules-based international order. But the sad reality is that the rules in that international order apply only when the enforcers of that order want them to apply. When they do not, the rules effectively do not apply, as we see so clearly in Gaza. And very regrettably, current legal and institutional arrangements claiming to be safeguards against that, like the International Criminal Court, the ICC, are likely to be of little help here. On that note, we can start by asking ourselves why Palestinian human rights organizations who previously had called for the ICC to intensify its work in Palestine, now refuse to even meet the ICC prosecutor when he comes to visit. I hope we'll come back to that topic later today, so let me leave it at that for now. Going back to the framing of our conversation today, our organizers, quite rightly, I believe, refer to the intensification of the Israel-Palestine conflict, because what we're witnessing now obviously comes with a long and in many ways quite mad context in history. One where violence and repression has become normality, one where people have been deprived for decades of very basic, very essential rights, one where international law hasn't mattered much for the people who were meant to be protected by it. And all of that has happened with the general acceptance of key players in the current global order, the actors who claim to protect us from savage. But I would like to add to what our organizers call intensification of conflict. And I would like to do so by emphasizing the notion of disaster and the notion of intentionality. What we are witnessing is an intense escalation of the conflict for sure, but it's also one that intentionally brings disaster. This past week, the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, resumed their military campaign with more intensity than ever, now focusing on southern Gaza, a place where the residents of Gaza had been previously advised to evacuate, but are now dying manifold. And let's be clear, they have nowhere to go. Key players in the global arena now tell Israel to operate with more precision, as they say, in their military attacks. But if they were serious about that, they wouldn't only talk, they would action, but we don't see any action happening. As a result, every day, every hour, people, old and young, whole families are being killed, mutilated, eradicated in a military campaign so intense in nature that is beyond my comprehension. And all of that is not just a failure of the current global order, it's a disaster in which its key members are complicit. What I say, of course, is by no means meant to downplay the atrocities committed by Hamas. And I'm not. These crimes clearly amount, from all we know, to the most serious crimes under international law, to crimes against humanity. And so the persons responsible for the hostage-taking, for the killing and burning, for the rape on October 7th, should of course be held to account. To be clear, the crimes committed by Hamas and other armed groups on October 7th are calculated, and they are intended to be inhumane. The crimes by the IDF are all of that too, but they happen, they occur, they are intended by a political and military leadership supported by self-proclaimed global leaders. So that's to say, these crimes, they happen with the sanctioning, or at least the general acceptance of those who claim to uphold a global order defined by rules. And that's an important fact, a fact of complicity that we need to keep in mind as we talk today. And so I will leave it at this for now, with my opening remarks that I'm sure many will find disturbing. But they need to be, because what we are witnessing is not only disturbing, it's a devastating blow, arguably the destruction of hope for anyone who dared have faith in the so-called rules-based international order as a somewhat fair and decent arbitrator of what goes and what does not in the global arena. Let me conclude these remarks by saying that what we're witnessing in Gaza is an absolute disaster, not only for the people subject to the bombardments, to the killing and destruction, but for anyone who places hope in the capacity of international law to protect and to compel parties to conflict to act with some basic decency and constraint. And with that, as much of Gaza has been effectively pulverized with the acceptance of key players in the Western-led order, whatever was left of the legitimacy of that order has, as I see it, vaporized. If that's true, we need to think harder about the frameworks that can assist us in our search for fairness and justice, to try to render reason to the unreasonable. Thank you all for listening, and I look forward to hearing from our other speakers. So on to you, Susan, and I will come back later with additional reflections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that really excellent and powerful intervention. And I'm just going to discuss a few kind of key elements. The first is that what we're seeing is an unfolding Nakba. We'll look at the complete destruction as well of Gaza, and also part of this is the destruction being the destruction of the Palestinian people as a group, both through the widespread killing of Palestinians and also the denial of basic conditions for survival. And I suppose one of the key things that has definitely been discussed with Palestinian organizations and people on the ground is that what we're witnessing here is a continuation of the Nakba. And we'll just kind of go back a little bit historically first, just to frame this and look at the term Nakba, which means catastrophe. And this is the catastrophe that befell the Palestinians back in 1947 to 1949, at the time of the establishment of the State of Israel. And at this time, 800,000 Palestinians were forcibly expelled from Palestine for the creation of the State of Israel. At the time, there was 531 Palestinian villages completely destroyed, and 15,000 Palestinians were killed. They were massacred by Zionist militias. And what we're seeing since in Palestine is the implementation of an apartheid regime. And this apartheid regime has been composed of discriminatory laws, policies, and practices over the Palestinian people, denying them their basic human rights, and also segregating the people into different administrative regimes. One of those regimes is the regime of the Palestinians in Gaza under siege, who are subject to a very brutal closure and denial of movement over the last 16 years. And this apartheid regime continued in the occupied Palestinian territory in 1967, the same discriminatory laws and policies and practices, but this time they were effected through military orders. But all through this time, we've seen waves of forcible transfer of Palestinians. So in 1967, we had another forcible transfer of 430,000 Palestinians from the territory. And since then, there's been like a slow forcible transfer of Palestinians through different various acts. So we've had about 14,643 Palestinians who've had residencies revoked in Jerusalem, and this has forced their transfer from Jerusalem. And we've had another 14,970 Palestinians who've had their houses demolished, and this has forced their transfer. So what we're seeing is this ongoing Nakba, these waves and waves of transferring Palestinians, removing them from the territory, either from the territory completely or to other parts of the territory. And then Israel creates settlements, expands the settlements, and there's this ongoing colonization of the territory. And since October 7th, what we're seeing now is a very accelerated Nakba, and this accelerated and nearly massive and irreversible ethnic cleansing in the Gaza Strip. And very early on, we had Israel's Deputy Prime Minister, Gideon Sa'ar. He's the Minister of Justice also, and he threatened that whoever starts a war against Israel must lose territory. And at the end of this war, not only will Hamas no longer be in Gaza, but also the territory of Gaza will also decrease. We also had the military rabbi, Amihi Friedman, who was applauding the Israeli troops. And he said, aside from the dead and the hostages, this is the happiest month of my life because the people have woken up and now we'll establish massive settlements in Gaza. We had the heritage minister who said Palestinians should go to Ireland or the deserts. And what we're really witnessing in real time is the execution of these plans to force the transfer and the mass displacement of Palestinians. And it's already started. We've seen the displacement of 1.9 million Palestinians across the Gaza Strip, and the mass transfer of Palestinians from the north to the south of the Gaza Strip. But there's also policies and leaked documents which have been published now, and we've one of them from Israel's intelligence ministry. And this provides for options for a policy regarding Gaza's civilian population. And it outlines a number of different scenarios, but its favorite scenario, and the one that it considers to be the most executable, is option C. And this is where Palestinians would be temporarily heralded into the Sinai, into tent cities as refugees, and then new cities would be constructed in the Sinai where Palestinians from Gaza would be resettled permanently. And they would also create this kind of sterile zone, this security perimeter between the Sinai and Gaza, a kind of a massive no-go area. And there's other options in that plan. Other options is the political removal of Hamas from the Gaza Strip, and the other option is the installation of the Palestinian Authority in the Gaza Strip. But the option which has been considered the most executable is the complete forcible removal of Palestinians from the territory. And last week, or it's only even this or earlier this week, we've had a proposal which has been circulated in the United States House of Senate and House of Representatives. And this proposal has now considered conditioning aid to various countries on them taking in Palestinian refugees. And we're not talking a few Palestinian refugees, we're talking the entirety of the population of the Gaza Strip. So it's looking for Egypt to host 1 million Palestinian refugees. It's looking for Iraq to take on, it's looking for Turkey to take on 500,000 refugees, and Iraq and Yemen to take on 250,000, so 250,000 refugees each. And we know what happens when Palestinians flee the territory as refugees, as what happened in the Nakba. They are never allowed to return. And that is why the main symbol of the Palestinian Nakba is the key to people's houses, the keys that they fled with. They've never been allowed to return. And what we're seeing planned and carrying out right in front of our eyes is a continuation of this Nakba. Already we're seeing the forcible displacement of Palestinians within the Gaza Strip. So a couple of days ago, a very detailed outline map was issued. It's broken up into 600 different zones. And at the moment, Israel is corralling and forcing Palestinians down to the south of the Gaza Strip, near where the previous Israeli settlements were in Gaza, in an area called Al-Mawasi. And we're seeing nearly 1.9 million Palestinians being forced down into this area. They're calling it a safe zone, but it's not a safe zone. There's no amenities there, no infrastructure. It's basically a barren, desolate area. There's nothing there. The UN is already saying that there will be mass deaths just from disease because of there's no basic facilities there. And this is nearly a holding plan. We have Palestinians, this mass displacement across the Gaza Strip, and potentially a deportation and mass forcible transfer of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip in their entirety. It's not just happening in the Gaza Strip. We're also seeing this in the West Bank. So even since October 7th, there's been 15 Palestinian villages in the West Bank that have been displaced. So 1,014 Palestinians have been displaced there. And there's been an escalation in house demolitions. We've had 38 house demolitions over the last 2 months, and another 238 Palestinians displaced from these house demolitions. And at the same time, we have the acceleration of settlement expansion and settlement construction. For the first time earlier this year, we've had 22 new settlements authorized for construction across the West Bank. And in the last 6 months, an additional 13,000 housing units, which have been green lighted for construction. So we're really seeing this colonization taking place at a very, very accelerated rate. And the second aspect I wanted to discuss is the actual destruction of Gaza. So we've seen, and everybody's seen this on their televisions, widespread, systematic, intense, heavy bombardments of the Gaza Strip. We've seen indiscriminate attacks on residential neighborhoods. In fact, the razing of entire neighborhoods. So Ramal is completely destroyed. The entire commercial center of the Gaza city. We have Beit Hanun completely destroyed, Al-Attara area of Beit Lahia. We have Sharjah, which is nearly completely destroyed. We were speaking with our partners on the ground in Palestinian Center for Human Rights. And they were saying there's neighborhoods people have grown up in, and the areas are so completely destroyed, you wouldn't even know where you are. They're unrecognizable. They're completely gone. We have residential buildings that have been destroyed with full of people in them, refugee camps targeted, commercial centers, mosques, churches, universities, schools, hospitals. There's no distinction. There's complete destruction of the Gaza Strip. And we're also seeing something that we haven't really seen in an occupied territory since World War II and since prior to the UN Charter. We're seeing a complete reduction of the territory to a state of debillatio. So destroying the territory to the point that it becomes a completely failed state. And this debillatio usually preceded a full annexation of territory. And what we're seeing is this playing out in real time, complete and utter destruction. We have destruction as well of the libraries. And only yesterday, 2 days ago, we had the destruction of all the courts, the Supreme Palestinian Court, Court of Appeal, the Court of First Instance, and also a systematic targeting of hospitals. And at the same time as this, we're also seeing not only the complete destruction of Gaza, but also the targeting and the destruction of the Palestinian people as a group, both through their fragmentation and forcible transfer, but also through killing and denying them the basic conditions for their survival. I think everyone is familiar with the very grave death toll. Only yesterday, it was over 16,000 Palestinians killed, 6,000 Palestinian children. We have entire families completely destroyed. We have 312 families where there's 10 or more Palestinians who've been killed. And this has been called a mass assassination factory. Gaza is now a graveyard for children. There's also the denial of basic conditions for survival. The Minister of Defense on October the 9th, Yoav Gallant, said, "We are imposing a complete siege on Gaza. There'll be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we act accordingly." And they have acted on this promise. Water was cut off, food was cut off. There was the denial of access of humanitarian convoys. And now, as we speak, we have a much reduced rate of humanitarian convoys that are even coming in. At the moment, it's only a third of what was coming in prior to October 7th. There's no humanitarian aid reaching the north of Gaza, and there's still about 400,000 people still in northern Gaza. In northern Gaza, people are now going hungry. So there's 97% of households have inadequate food, and we're seeing in 48% of people severe levels of hunger. It's now at a critical humanitarian point. At the same time as well, there's also the complete targeting and decimation of the hospitals and the denial of the basic infrastructure for people for survival. There's 21 out of 35 of the hospitals in Gaza where people are sheltering as well after being displaced, and these are now rendered out of service. And Israel has also launched attacks on bakeries to the point where the bakeries don't open for fear of being targeted. So what we're seeing is a complete annihilation of Gaza, the destruction of the entirety of the territory, and the mass forcible removal of the Palestinian people to a small pocket of Gaza. And this is a holding area for a potential forced removal of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip in its entirety. And this is a Nakba. This is a continuation of the Nakba. And this is a very final point in Israel's colonization of the entirety of the Palestinian territory. And this is being carried out through the commission of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and now what looks like acts of genocide. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to talk about some of the legal dimensions of this, and particularly the possible remedies that may exist, ways where the issues that arise from the conflict can be judged by courts. It's I don't want to say unprecedented situation, but actually there are some doors that are open that are not often open when there are conflicts. And of course, a great deal of attention is being paid by professionals, mainly legal professionals, in attempting to use these in order to address the atrocities and the war crimes and violations being committed during the conflict, and to protect the Palestinian civilians in Gaza who are suffering so terribly right now. I'm going to divide it into two parts because there are two main courts I'm going to speak about. There is litigation going on at the domestic level, and I'm not really in a position to discuss that in any detail. There is a case that was filed by the Center for Constitutional Rights in the United States. And as perhaps some of the listeners know, I prepared a legal opinion for that, explaining the legal requirements that have been imposed with respect to the situation where there's a serious threat of genocide. And this involves establishing that there's a serious threat of genocide. It's not necessary to establish that genocide is taking place or has taken place. So it's a lower threshold. It's one of warning, and there are recognized legal obligations and so that's the basis of the litigation, or at least part of the litigation going on in the United States. And I understand that tomorrow the US government, or the defendants, Joe Biden and Antony Blinken, are required to make their own submissions. So we're going to hear a statement from them on the legal issues and their own defense, presumably, as to whether or not they are taking measures to prevent genocide by putting pressure on Israel. I'm going to focus now on the first of the two courts at the international level that are most relevant. The first is the International Court of Justice, the World Court, which is a court of states, of countries. The International Court of Justice is already confronted with a pending case dealing with the situation in Palestine. This is what's called an advisory opinion. It was requested at the very end of 2022, so 11 months ago, and 11 months and 3 weeks ago. It was requested by the United Nations General Assembly. The title of the case is Legal Consequences Arising from the Policies and Practices of Israel in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem. And that case is set for argument, for submissions, an oral hearing, beginning in the middle of February. And so this is going to provide a very prominent, prestigious, important forum for many participants in the litigation, interveners of one form or another, to make statements about the ongoing conflict. Of course, when the request was made by the General Assembly, what has happened in the last 2 months, of course, could not have been anticipated or perhaps even imagined. But that door is already open, and there will be a hearing soon on it, and we will have an advisory opinion probably before the end of 2024, which may not seem urgent enough, but in terms of how international tribunals function, this is actually pretty quick. The other door that's open is at the same International Court of Justice, and this arises from the Genocide Convention of 1948, which gives jurisdiction to the International Court of Justice for disputes about the Genocide Convention, including claims that one state has committed genocide. It's also possible to litigate the issue of the obligation to prevent genocide. Now, I understand that this is all the participants, and particularly the Palestinian Authority, are well aware of this. For the time being, no case has been taken at the International Court of Justice. There are rumors floating that perhaps Jordan or some other state would take it. There are more than 150 parties to the Genocide Convention, and any one of them can actually take the case because they're all said to have an interest in the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide. One of the intriguing features of an application to the International Court of Justice is that the court will typically, if requested, and that undoubtedly would be the case in the current circumstances, would issue what's called a provisional measures order. The provisional measures order it's not very demanding in terms of obtaining it, and it provides a very, very powerful message from the International Court of Justice. I would think that the chances of one being awarded requiring Israel to making calls on Israel with regard to its conduct would be quite likely. The International Court of Justice and file it tomorrow, we would expect to have a result within a week, 10 days, 3 weeks, something like that. The other court that, of course, all of the participants in this session will be very well aware of is the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court has had an investigation, a formal investigation, ongoing into the situation in Palestine now for about 3 years. It was the result of Palestine joining the International Court of Justice, ratifying the Rome Statute back in 2015. A slow but steady progress towards that, the opening of this investigation followed the decision at the request of the prosecutor by judges of the pretrial chamber about where and how jurisdiction could be exercised over the territory of Palestine. 2 of the judges were essentially prepared to give a fully green light. One of them was very, very hesitant and wrote what's called a dissenting opinion, or a partially dissenting opinion, where he explained that in the territory where the investigation to which it could be applied is defined by the Oslo Agreement and by the authority of Palestine to exercise criminal justice under the provisions of the Oslo Agreement, which is quite narrow. I won't go into the technical details except to say that dissenting view is not very helpful. And so we have a situation where 2 out of 3 judges have been positive, but that doesn't mean that the next 3 judges wouldn't be opposite. So far from a settled matter, I would have to say, in the cold light of day, but nevertheless, a door that's open. And when the investigation began, this was really the work of the previous prosecutor. When the previous prosecutor's term ended and she was replaced, the current prosecutor, whose name will be familiar to everybody, Karim Khan, took over. This is a court where the key to investigations is the discretion of the prosecutor. The prosecutor has an enormous amount of discretion, and Karim Khan has shown a decided lack of enthusiasm for pursuing an investigation into Palestine. Now, he's been visible in the last few weeks, making statements. He made a visit to Israel and to the Bank a week ago, last week, and he's made sort of typical statements. But we have to say, knowing his attitude to the investigation prior to the events of October of this year that began in October, that he's not an enthusiast for it. And in fact, he's been pursuing an agenda which I would call the Western or the NATO agenda at the International Criminal Court, where a huge amount of its resources, including many that have been contributed by member states from the northern part of the world, has created a huge distortion in the work of the court, with an immense focus on the situation in Ukraine, the conflict in Ukraine. Obviously, there were terrible casualties and results in the conflict in Ukraine that cry out for international criminal justice. But when we put them on a scale and weigh them all up, Ukraine looks like a bit of a picnic compared to what's been going on in Gaza for the last 7 or 8 weeks. Just to mention, Susan Power mentioned the latest figures on children. I think that the total number, according to the UN reports on casualties of children in Ukraine since the end of February 2022, so almost 2 years ago, is under 1,000. 1,000 children, deaths of children. We're now up to something like 6,000 or 7,000 in Palestine, in Gaza. So just these are on a different scale. And by the way, don't lose sight of the fact that the population of Ukraine at 40 million people is about 20 times the population of Gaza. And yet, even today, I would be fairly confident saying that there's far more being invested in the investigation in Ukraine today by the International Criminal Court than is being in the very limited activity relating to the situation in Gaza. And it's just an example of the double standards that plague the international system, what are sometimes called, but I hate the expression, the rules-based system. Thomas referred to it as the rules-based system, but it's not a rules-based system at all. It's a system, whether we're at the International Court of Justice or at the International Criminal Court, that is plagued, contaminated with double standards, and we're all seeing that today. Now, some of the practical matters at the International Criminal Court. The court, at least according to the majority decision of the pretrial chamber, can fully exercise jurisdiction over the territory of Palestine. So that includes Gaza, it includes the West Bank, it includes East Jerusalem. These are all territories over which the court has jurisdiction, regardless of the nationality of the perpetrator of the crime. So this means that Israeli soldiers in those territories and those who are outside those territories but who are involved in directing the crimes that are being committed in Gaza in particular can in theory be prosecuted by the International Criminal Court. The court also has jurisdiction over the nationals of a member state of the court. Palestine is a member state, Israel is not. So the acts of Palestinian nationals inside Israel are also subject to the international, to the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. Even if the court has jurisdiction over the individuals, over the territory, and so on, the case still has to be judged. The cases and the situations have to be admissible. And here the problem is that Israel is going to throw up a very strong argument that its own military courts do the job of addressing war crimes committed by Israeli soldiers. Now, I'm sure that many people in the audience would be skeptical as to how reliable that would be, how likely that is to deliver justice, but it's a hard barrier to get over. The evidence, the clear evidence of that is the very successful work undertaken by the United Kingdom government in attempts to open up prosecution of United Kingdom soldiers for torture that was committed in Iraq when it was occupied by the United Kingdom. The court has jurisdiction over those crimes. Nobody doubts it. There were settlements paid, huge amounts of money were paid to victims of those crimes at a civil level, and there were judgments on this by the European Court of Human Rights. But the International Criminal Court, despite having jurisdiction, has been incapable of dealing with those crimes. And finally, the last prosecutor, towards the end of her term, just threw up her hands and she said, it's impossible for me to get at this because the United Kingdom is so effective in making claims that it's investigating the crimes, even though to this day, the perpetrators have never been held accountable. So that's a problem that's going to confront the International Criminal Court if it ever does decide to proceed against Israeli soldiers. Now, finally, and I'll conclude with this, I just want to say a few words about the possible crimes that could be taken up by the prosecutor if he decides to pursue the investigation and eventually charge perpetrators of the crimes. There's a category of war crimes that I should say at the outset that there are different categories of international crimes. People in a colloquial sense describe the International Criminal Court as a war crimes tribunal, but it's actually more than that. It deals with crimes against humanity and genocide as well. But we often speak about war crimes in a more popular, generic sense. So I'm talking here about the technical war crimes, which are violations of the laws of war. And these involve the actual battle of indiscriminate weapons. Well, these cases, I have to say, are notoriously difficult to prosecute. They seem straightforward, but they've proven to be very difficult. At the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, when there were attempts to prosecute the use of indiscriminate artillery in urban areas, situation not so different from some of what we're encountering now in Gaza. After 3 judges of a trial chamber convicted a Croatian general for war crimes, 3 judges of an appeals chamber reversed that decision. They had been pumped up by a legal opinion that was presented to them, prepared by military lawyers from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Israel. And that's an obstacle. That's an obstacle that we'll have to confront. Nevertheless, there have been statements that suggest that some outrageous statements, some references by Israeli officials to the fact that they're doing nothing more than what the Allies did in the Second World War in Dresden and Hiroshima. Personally, I would have thought that that's an admission that they're war crimes rather than a defense to the charge that they're war crimes. There's also this recent indication that targeting is being based on artificial intelligence mechanisms. And this suggests to me criminality as well, because while I can understand an algorithm that would be able to identify a military objective as opposed to a civilian object, I don't know what kind of an algorithm is going to be able to indicate the proportionality in attacking a hospital, because found a few machine time that the prosecutor seems to have forgotten, because he is talking as if this whole investigation really begins with the 7th of October, is the crime of settlements in the West Bank. And this is a crime that we know that they have been looking at, that they've been investigating. It's a clear war crime. And it would seem to me a crime also that's not going to encounter that threshold of admissibility where Israel can claim that it's investigating and prosecuting the crime, something that it is going to do with the conduct of hostilities type of war crimes. The second category, crimes against humanity, and here we have two very obvious crimes against humanity where there appears to be strong evidence they're being committed. One is the crime against humanity of deportation. Something, by the way, in the case of children, again, I don't want to get into comparisons of what's happened to the children in Ukraine who have been deported to Russia, but where there are no serious allegations of physical abuse of any kind, with the deportations, the horrific deportations that have taken place already in Gaza, and as Susan Power explained, are being discussed and contemplated for the future. And then finally, the crime against humanity of apartheid, which is clearly set out in the Rome Statute and is just an open invitation for the prosecutor to pursue. And then I turn to the third category. I only want to say a few words about it. This is the crime of genocide. The crime of genocide can not only be addressed by the International Court of Justice, as I explained at the beginning of my remarks, but also by the International Criminal Court. Of course, it's all a question of the evidence. The threshold of evidence is very high, and one could we could get distracted by spending a huge amount of energy trying to make the claim that it's genocide when we have much more straightforward arguments, easy to establish, relatively easy to establish, for the existence of war crimes and crimes against humanity before the International Criminal Court. So thank you for your attention. And I think the person you're all waiting to hear from is now in the room, our special rapporteur.
Great. Thanks so much, Bill. And on to you, Francesca. I hear from the organizers that we don't have so much time, so I'm just going to pass on to you straight away.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure and honor to be at this event. So yes, thanks to the Ulster University Transitional Justice Institute, all of you organized it, and my distinguished panelists, Dr. Susan Power and Professor William Schabas. Just 19 months ago, when I commenced my term as a special rapporteur, monitoring and reporting to the UN the international law violations in the occupied Palestinian territory, the situation was catastrophic enough. It was already very bad. But since then, and the years that preceded it, the realities has evolved as an even more troubling one. This is the reality that has led to the inferno on earth that is now the occupied Palestinian territory, the Gaza Strip first and foremost. But already the incursions in the West Bank were unprecedented outside of the first and second Intifada, with over 400 Palestinians killed in the first 16 months of my mandate before the 7th of October, and 60 Israelis killed. This is not normal. This is what I've been telling the international community through and through. And the previous year, 2021, had already been the most lethal for Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory in 20 years outside of the Gaza war in 2014. The precipice for the Gaza Strip becoming unlivable due to the unlawful 16-year-old blockade had come and gone in 2020, and not only did nothing change, the situation appeared to becoming increasingly marginal in the public debate, as Israel was, on the other hand, advancing its land grabbing in the West Bank and Palestinian removal from East Jerusalem, one house at a time. Now, as we meet, the tragic hours we are living in seems to, as I often say these days, have thrown us on the ground zero of humanity. As of the 7th of October, with, as it has been said before, almost 18,000 people killed since the 7th of October, if we take into account both the Israelis and the Palestinians, but 90% of them are just Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. They are now in Gaza in the 62nd day of unrelenting bombing from Israel in the name of a non-existent right to self-defense under the UN Charter. Because I've kept on saying over and over, Israel has the right to protect itself, its territory, and its citizens, but it doesn't have the right to wage a war against the population it maintains under belligerent occupation. And this is based on consolidated jurisprudence of the International Court of Justice. Now, after the most fragile of tortured reprieves and the welcome exchange of captives on both sides, the 7-day ceasefire is already a distant memory as Israel has resumed its bombardment with even greater intensity, focused heavily on the south, where everyone has evacuated to, which had already been bombed, and from where people have nowhere to go. And in the face of all this, we have a urgent need to find a way to a sustained ceasefire, and even a greater imperative to turn toward the root causes for a sustained resolution for both Palestinians and Israeli Jews. In a situation as prolonged as that in Israel and Palestine, it demands taking a sort of high-bird holistic analysis of the violations of international law. This means abandoning the decontextualized, the dehistoricized, microscopic analysis of single violations of international law, and addressing and accounting for the intentions behind the long-standing structural component of the prolonged disenfranchisement of the Palestinians under occupation. This means recognizing that contrary to how the situation is positioned to outsiders, particularly those who follow it through Western media and Western political discourse, this is not about the flare-up that must return to a situation of calm. The status quo, whatever it was, is gone. Now, for Palestinians, though they might be facing the most egregious assault on their people since the Nakba, and probably even worse than the Nakba, violence is a daily structural component of their life. It is embedded in the very nature of Israel's half-a-century-old military occupation of the land that constitutes the territorial unity for them to exercise self-determination in the form of independent statehood. And for those who listen to us, it's worth remembering that self-determination must be realized in whatever form. And if it's not in the form of independent statehood, it is to be realized in the form of full equal citizenship. It means considering also the statements made by Israeli politicians and military unveiling a genocidal intent to wipe out Gaza and its residents that cannot be ignored. And also the actions of the Israeli military and political leaders cannot be ignored. Even in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, where Hamas has no authority or military presence, Israeli soldiers and armed settlers have been terrorizing Palestinian communities every day. With greater intensity as of 7th of October. And they've killed almost 260 Palestinians, including 65 children, injuring over 3,000 people, and arbitrarily arresting thousands, forcibly displacing 15 herding communities and depopulating 11 villages in the South Hebron Hills and the Jordan Valley. These after distributing evacuation flyers across the West Bank, ordering the Palestinians to leave to Jordan. So this is why I've said several times over the past 2 months, if the Western consciousness has still to register what the Nakba is, voila, under our eyes, even televised. So looking also at the enduring use of mass incarceration, and I've written a report about that presented at the Human Rights Council in July last year. 1 million almost 1 million Palestinians have been incarcerated in 56 years of military occupation, including 13,000 kids as of 2005. This is how does it happen? Why this happened? Through a draconian system of military orders that consider the Palestinians a security threat. Detention, arrests and detentions have been used as tools to subjugate an entire population, contributing to deprive them of the right of self-determination, criminalizing the Palestinian identity through chronic exposure to violence. Until the state's actions induce the trauma that sows the seeds of aggression later in life that justifies the ongoing criminalization. Only now who's blamed for those actions is the Palestinian body, the Palestinian collective, the colonized, the occupied. So, of course, Palestinians, I've often said, are detained both behind and beyond bars, if one considers the physical confinement that Israel had imposed through this occupation, the segregated roads, the checkpoints, the enclosed area communities, the closed areas, but also through bureaucratic means, debt and barriers that prevent the Palestinians to travel, to choose where to take residence, whom to marry, where to study, if to study, whether to open a business or not, and so on and so forth. But also another layer of carcerality is through digital surveillance. Palestinians are the most surveilled people on earth, and what is tested on them, both in battle and through the spying system, is then profitably sold by Israel to other countries, which is just obscene. So in this situation, the Israeli government and its supporters have been spinning narratives that continue to portray the Palestinians as an existential threat to the Jewish people, and the Palestinian struggle for rights as a direct challenge to Israel's very existence. This is what has also underpinned the actions of the Israeli states and others towards silencing, excluding, erasing, stereotyping, defaming, and dehumanizing Palestinians and their allies and their discourse. So this is what I call, together with others, it's not my crafting, but it's appropriate to call all these anti-Palestinian racism, and it is to be exposed, and it is to be denounced. It is not to be conflated with Islamophobia or anti-Arabism. Maybe overlaps with both, but it's a different category, and it is to be exposed now because it's happening both at the end of Israel and at the end of most Western countries. Piecing all these components together with other rapporteurs, I have warned against the risk that Israel, with a connivance or just a blind eye of the international community, might be committing the crime and genocide against the Palestinian people. And we have done so 45, 35, 25 days ago. It has already been explained eloquently what genocide is and might constitute, and again, why having someone sounding the alarm is important, not because it is to be concluded 100% that it's genocide, but because the risk of genocide being committed triggers the responsibility of states to intervene. And I find that today, the international community continues to utterly fail both the Palestinians and the Israelis. Failing them means not helping them find a path to peace premised upon international law, and equality, freedom, and dignity of all and of both, which is what is going to grant stability and sustainability of any settlement. We exist in a political landscape that is marked by historical amnesia and outright political myopia, I believe, where human rights have becoming just fodder for those in power. And as human rights lawyers, practitioners, or activists, we must take hold of the narratives that center humanity and understand colonial legacies that enable these settler colonial practices to remain embedded in or overlooked by the law and our praxis, and decide what we can do with that. So I offer this reminder. The story of Palestine illustrates how international practice perpetuates injustice. This is not just about Palestine. Many are recognizing themselves in the struggle of the Palestinians once again, many in the global south, but also many in Western societies, recognizing that their struggle vis-a-vis the power, the constituted power with a capital P is neglected, overlooked, or just minimized, downplayed with the same kind of condescendence that continues to be reserved to the Palestinians. So going back to Palestine, I believe that ending the occupation and colonization is an imperative, a moral and categorical imperative mandated by international law, simply to allow the other to live in freedom, safety, and dignity. And this is what justice means. This is what humanity means. In this rehumanization effort, I keep on convincingly including the Israelis, because like the Palestinians, they are part and parcel of an anachronistic settler colonial endeavor, of course, with unparalleled roles, responsibilities, and suffering. But ending Jewish-Israeli domination, domination in the sense of the Apartheid Convention. So ending Jewish-Israeli domination will be a rehumanizing act for the Israelis as well, because no one can oppress and brutalize others as they do with the Palestinians without themselves experiencing a loss of humanity in the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those reflections, Francesca. And I think we got about 25 minutes left of our event, so we can move to the question and answer part of the event now. So just to check, Siobhán, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can
good
you
and
hear?
clear.
Okay. I'm sorry, everybody. I had a problem and I got so I've missed quite a bit of this. I'll listen to the recording, but I got cut off. So I'm a little bit thrown, but I'm back in again. And I'd like to thank for what I heard, the powerful presentations by all of the speakers, and the wonderful balancing of the different issues. I haven't been able to read through the Q&A because I've been cut off. But I'd just like to say that we do have a brief bit of time for Q&A, and if people would like to pose the questions through the Zoom Q&A, I will try and process as best I can those questions. And so one of the questions from Saul Greenberg was asking, what scope is there for bringing cases before the High Court of Justice in Israel? And he's asked if one of the speakers could speak to this point if they have the expertise on this. He points out that the High Court of Justice has had a long history since 1967 of litigating cases in respect of the West Bank, and whether that might be an avenue. His question is very long with details. I've just summarized the actual question part. Is there anybody on the panel that would feel able to speak to that? Anyone? Bill has taken his... Is anybody willing to go to that one?
Speaking, my microphone has turned my mic on, thinking that I know the answer. So I'm very sorry, I don't know the answer. I don't know enough about it. But I think Susan probably does.
Well, like as Al-Haq, we stopped actually, we stopped working and taking cases to the Israeli High Court of Justice, which sits as the Supreme Court as well. And we stopped taking those cases maybe back about 10 years ago, because it was very clear that it's not an avenue for justice, and that the Israeli High Court of Justice is the long arm of the colonial power. And in particular, like what we could see in the West Bank when we were taking cases in relation to settlements, property that was appropriated from Palestinians for settlement construction, that Israel was not applying, and the court was not applying provisions of the Geneva Convention. So it was picking and choosing what provisions it would apply. So it would apply customary international law provisions, but it would not apply, and just in a very ad hoc way, never said which ones they actually were, and categorically would not apply Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prohibits the acts of settler transfer in to the territory and the forcible removal of Palestinians of people from the territory as well. So this is intensely problematic, because the the court was not applying the provisions which would prevent the colonization of the territory and which would prevent the ongoing displacement, replacement, this ongoing Nakba that we've discussed. So this is, for us, it was an inherently unjust a forum and an unjust institution to be going through, and it was clear there was no justice, and we've seen this right across the board. Even when there's massive pressure, like there was a killing a few years ago, and a soldier, Azaria, killed a Palestinian in Hebron. And at this time, and it was all over the international media. He was killed at point blank range, and it was caught, very unusually, it was caught on video. And the prosecution there was a prosecution did go ahead, but there was such a reduction of the sentence that the soldier was released after a very, very minimal sentence. Like, it was only, I think, a couple of months, and he was released again. And we can see this kind of shielding of the Israeli court system of various perpetrators. And it was for this reason that we went to the International Criminal Court to begin with, because it was clear there was no justice. Like, even in 2014, which was the last very serious, grave escalation in the Gaza Strip, where we had over 2,200 people killed over a 50-day period. And at that time, the military, and as Professor Schabas said, like, the military has a way of investigating itself. There's the military advocate general, the new system set up, but the previous system, where the military body examined the acts of the soldiers during this 50-day period, where 2,200 Palestinians were killed, and again we had a massive destruction of the territory. There was only three disciplinaries out of this, and that was for acts of petty looting. So we can see that this system is designed to protect soldiers. It's designed to protect the system and to, in a very minimal way, just do enough so it's not completely obvious that it's just absolutely not applying the law. But at the same time, it's what we would call under, like, the International Criminal Court, the Rome Statute, it's shielding of perpetrators, and this is effectively what we're seeing in with the Israeli court system. So we abandoned this, and we put our sights to the International Criminal Court, and we have done this since 2016. We really started putting the files together, the communications for the International Criminal Court, and highlighting that there's no option but to seek justice outside. And for the magnitude and enormity of the crimes, the gravity of the crimes, it's something that the Israelis can't investigate themselves. Like, there's no justice there.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. Since you were talking about the ICC, and there's a follow-up, well, it's a question from a different viewer, from Emma Procacci, and for anyone who wants to answer on the issue of the ICC, if the ICC were to take action and release arrest warrants, how far up Israel's side do you think it would be possible to establish individual criminal responsibility? Would it stop at high-ranking military generals, or would it go further to implicate Netanyahu's responsibility?
Well, I'll take that one then. Well, how far up could you go? I mean, the prosecutor, not just the current one, but all three prosecutors really, since the International Criminal Court began, have gone high up. They don't do it in every case, but in the case of Sudan, they went for President Bashir, right, pretty much from the beginning of Sudan, and devoted a huge amount of energy over many, many years to try and obtain custody of him. As far as I can see, the evidence against him essentially amounts to, you were the president, so you must be responsible for everything bad that happened. It's not as if he was there riding a horse into the villages of Darfur personally and leading the attacks, but he's being blamed because he's the guy in charge. Now we have this great publicity stunt by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court going after the president of Russia, to great acclaim and it enabled then every journalist on the planet to start describing Putin as being an indicted war criminal. Once again, we have no idea what the basis of the evidence is, because strangely, in this key case where the International Criminal Court has charged the head of state of a permanent member of the Security Council, they've kept the proceedings confidential. So we don't even know what the actual charges are, except once again, it all seems to be the view that it's called Putin's war. He's in charge, so he must be the guy to go after. Well, so be consistent. That's all I can say. The prosecutor should be consistent. Go after the guy in charge. That's Netanyahu. But we also have two categories of crime that are not about joining up the dots to establish individual criminal responsibility with respect to distinct war crimes. We're talking about policy. We're talking about settlements in the occupied territories. We're talking about apartheid. And these are, the guy in charge can't weasel out of that. So the answer is yes, they can, but there are some conditionals in there, including in your question, Emma, as to would they? And this is another question. As I say, we're living in a universe of double standards, and it infects the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, just as it infects the United Nations human rights system. There's also, Siobhán, if I may, there's a little question from Parisa that's sort of directed at the same, or I think maybe at the ICC, and she just asks, is there any way for the pretrial chamber, the Assembly of States Parties, or a state party to put pressure or to compel the prosecutor to act? I think the short answer is no. We've created a system which we all believe to be this wonderful independent system of justice where the prosecutor was immune to pressure. But the problem is we are confronted now with a situation where a single individual exercises full discretion, and that's a very hard thing to get at. People have been calling for him being, requested to resign or being removed. But of course, in order to enhance the independence of the prosecutor, there are a whole lot of walls that have been built into the Rome Statute to prevent that happening frivolously. Now, is he immune to pressure? I'm sure he's not immune to pressure. The problem is I don't know that he's immune to pressure from the government of the United Kingdom and the government of the United States and the government of Israel. I don't think he's immune to that kind of pressure either. So yes, could the pretrial chamber do something? Technically, not really, although a state like South Africa that's made a referral could arguably go to the pretrial chamber and make a bit of a noise that would get attention, but I don't think legally it has any chance of prospering. As for the Assembly of States Parties, there's traditionally been great reluctance by the Assembly of States Parties to do anything that would suggest intervention in the discretion of the prosecutor. And as for individual states parties, oh yes, they put pressure on the prosecutor all the time in quiet little discreet ways and in some quite public ways, like giving him a whole lot of money to do things they would like to be done. So he's been given a whole lot of money after being starved in his first year and a half of his mandate. All of a sudden, with the invasion of Ukraine, the purse strings opened up because the rich countries of Western Europe want him to focus on Ukraine. There have been some minor, some contributions. Ireland gave 3 million. And I think that Belgium, there are reports, although I have trouble believing it, but they say Belgium has given 5 million to the prosecutor for investigations into the situation in Palestine. So that's a good sign. But the problem is most of Palestine's friends don't have the kind of money that its enemies have. And that's the problem with this, the use of these voluntary contributions to the court. They become a distortion whereby the rich countries can buy can take over the agenda of the prosecutor because they have money and the rest of the world doesn't.
Thank you. That's
maybe
a very...
Siobhán, can I?
Sorry, yes, you can, of course. And take the questions as you like.
So really, I think I just want to add maybe a question to build And Susan, in light of what we're talking about concerning the International Criminal Court here, and I'm entirely on the same page as you, Bill, that, I mean, what we're facing is, of course, a situation where the court ought to go after the very top, because it's I mean, seems fairly clear just looking at listening to the statements that, you know, crimes are being endorsed and carried out, and that very likely that will probably not happen. So to maybe follow up on what we're talking about here, would the ICC have any legitimacy left if it does not pursue leaders in the current conflict? And maybe specifically to you, Susan, I'm curious, what's the view among Palestinian human rights organizations at the moment when the prosecutor came to visit? I think it was last week, right? That many organizations refused to meet with him, and I assume probably for good reasons. But also, if faith is being lost entirely in the ICC, what alternative avenues are you thinking about? Are you considering universal jurisdiction cases, for example? So just very briefly from my side for now.
Yeah, it's a great question. I suppose for our organization and other organizations in Palestine, and also the victims' representatives, the victims' lawyers, like for the last 2 years since prosecutor Karim Khan took office, there has been requests for a meeting with victims' lawyers, with the Palestinian human rights organizations and victims as well, and for a meeting to take place in The Hague directly. And there was many requests, like from right across the board, from different organizations and different lawyers, and all of these requests were avoided basically, and we never had an audience with the prosecutor since he took office, even though Palestine has been under investigation. The situation has been under investigation now for nearly 2 years. But also it was very much deprioritized amongst all the situations. So even with the budget and the allocation, it had the lowest budgetary allocation coming into, like in 2022 and 2023, of all the other situations. So it had barely enough. It had barely enough to even function. It was really on a skeleton, on a shoestring. And when we pressed about this, and many organizations, Human Rights Watch, many different organizations pushed on why there was such a minimal allocation of resources to the situation in Palestine, then there was a decision made that the allocations between and the budget of the court wouldn't be published. So we have this more kind of more lack of transparency coming from the court. But this is just building up all the frustration, and then maybe 2 weeks. And while this situation has been going on since October 7th, and maybe about 2 weeks ago, the prosecutor met with Israeli victims in The Hague, and with their lawyers, and then took like a very speedy trip out to meet more victims in Israel, more Israeli victims, and at a very last minute decided to meet not with Palestinian victims, but with the Palestinian political representatives in Ramallah, so in government buildings. No trips out to see the crime scenes, no trips out to see the settlements. I mean, the settlements, it's very clear, the settlements scarring the entirety of the West Bank. It's very clear there's no West Bank left. It's very clear we're at the point of no return. It's very, very clear if you take a trip around, but he didn't take a trip around. He didn't take a trip around, but he did take a trip down. He did take a trip down to the sites in Israel. And of course, there was extreme frustration with this. And the move by the Palestinian organizations was to express, in the only way that we can, this extreme frustration that we've been submitting communications to the court, like since, I mean, our organization since 2016, you know, we have huge files gone in, massive files, like the amount of evidence that is before the prosecutor and before the prosecutor's office. Like we've teams of people just working on this alone for years, just putting files in, and to not get even a meeting, it's just so disrespectful and racist, you know. And that was the feeling. That's the feeling on the ground. And I think we need to focus on the long term. And for us, the long term is justice at the International Criminal Court. And like, we're victim centered and victim orientated. We cannot give up on the victims. You know, there's people being pulled out of the rubble in Gaza, just a hand, just a foot, a head, a child's head, just people disintegrated, you know, and this is what we're dealing with. And the families of those victims and the families of those who are forcibly transferred, the families of those who are the people who are incarcerated without trial, we are obliged to push for their human rights. We are obliged to seek justice for those people. And we are obliged to not give up on the International Criminal Court, despite whatever fallout there is with these political issues with the prosecutor. We demand this to all come back on track. We all need to work with one vision, and we all need to work to see that justice is done. And we won't give up on this court. We won't give up on this court. We can't give up on this court. This is our only option. And the victims deserve to get their day of justice. And we will never, ever relinquish that. We will fight to the end for it.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. And I fully
Could I add something,
agree.
Siobhán?
Yes, do.
I hesitate to even try and follow Susan's eloquent words, but I think one of the things that we must be doing is insisting that they respect the statute of the International Criminal Court. When the prosecutor threw all of the resources into the investigation in Ukraine, it was as if the whole issue of whether Ukraine's courts are willing and able to prosecute the case was entirely overlooked. But Ukraine really should not be a case for the International Criminal Court at all. It has a functioning justice system, one that also is receiving all kinds of assistance. People, including myself, have been involved in participating in training and giving advice to the people involved in Ukraine's justice system. It's a system that's subject to the European Court of Human Rights. The International Criminal Court shouldn't be there in the first place. It has no place there. It's not the same in Israel and Palestine. The Palestinian courts don't have any jurisdiction, for example, over what happened in Israel on the 7th of October. They're deprived of that by the Oslo agreements, if nothing else. But who has jurisdiction? The Israeli courts. So he shouldn't, before going even to meet with victims of the 7th of October, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court should be saying, do your investigations. It's not his job. Let them start. Let them build their files. Let them identify suspects. Then if they can't get jurisdiction over them, then maybe knock on the door of the ICC. But at present, there's no need for the ICC with regard to what happened in Israel on the 7th of October. And I'm just reading the statute. That's what the statute says. But they've all forgotten it because it's all politics. It's all being politicized, and saying that the prosecutor's out investigating 7th of October, Ukraine, it all sells pretty well in certain constituencies, and that's what's going on. But that shouldn't be going on if we apply the statute.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's very disturbing. We don't really have time for any more questions, but I'll put one. Because yesterday, I think, Guterres brought an Article 99 measure to the UN Charter to seek, once again, for the Security Council to ask for a ceasefire. And Emma Procacci would like to know whether any of you think that is likely to happen. And I would like to know what you think, if it's not likely to happen, what that means for the United Nations or international law. Anyone? No one has an answer to that.
No, Susan doesn't want to think. Well, I mean, the Article 99, invoking Article 99 of the Charter of the United Nations, is really it's the silver bullet of the Secretary General. It's also pretty much the only bullet of the Secretary General, who is otherwise a functionary who's there to do the bidding of the General Assembly, the Security Council, and the other principal organs of the United Nations. So it's a great initiative. It's sending an important message. It's only been done perhaps half a dozen times in the history of the United Nations. And as my understanding is that the Security Council does have to be convened to deal with this. But it doesn't give the Secretary General any power. It's a very important political message. It's really important because he's saying, I think the last time it might have been 1989 or something by the Secretary General. So he's saying this is the first time, certainly in the 21st century. And so it's a pretty powerful message from the Secretary General, who has been, I think, punching above his weight in the last couple of months, doing better than might have expected. So let's encourage him.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of the speakers for your very powerful presentations. Thank you to Alan for Zoom hosting. And thank you to our interpreters, Daniela and Saman. And then I'm just going to pass back to my colleague, Thomas Hansen, for closing remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Siobhán, and thanks to all our speakers again, and to our audience today. So, I mean, I know we're running up to time, so just very briefly for me, then, I mean, maybe to round off my reflections, then if I can come back and say, if the international legal architecture and the global order surrounding it cannot find a better and more adequate answer for what we're facing, what we are witnessing, I think we face an obligation to search for something better, something more just and more fair, something inherently more humane to replace what exists. So we need to wake up individually and collectively to face a reality where international legal regimes, sometimes trying whatever they can, but ultimately tending to fail, as they too often cannot compel global leaders and end up serving a self-serving, self-proclaimed just global order, but one that's ultimately not. Finding good alternatives is difficult, though. It's so much easier to point to what's wrong with the current order than it is to identify good alternatives. So to maybe end my remarks on an encouraging note, I think it's encouraging to see that some states, even in the West, dare to speak up, to stand up to Israel, and by extension to its close allies. Spain and Belgium come to mind as important examples. It's also important and encouraging that civil society organizations speak up, that we lawyers and academics speak up, that UN organs and mandate holders speak up and try their best to fulfill their mandate, even in the face of resistance. And so we need to continue to add pressure on our governments to face the current situation with more reason, more fairness, more determination. And we need to unite more in our opposition, in our demands for this carnage to end, for it to end now. And we need to unite and strategize to bring justice to the people in Palestine and Israel, to find a way to hold those responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, to account. All too often have we said, never again. It's our obligation, our moral obligation, as I see it, to search for more just solutions to crisis. So with that, I will end my closing remarks and hand back to you, Siobhán. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. We are over time now, and I just want to say thank you all, and thank you to everybody online who has tuned in. Courage to everyone. Thank you all. And bye. Till the next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.